goddess nobody invited rolls one golden apple across a wedding floor, and 10 years later a city burns. The wedding belonged to a mortal king and a sea nymph, and every god on Olympus received an invitation. Every god except Eris, goddess of discord, whose presence had a habit of ending celebrations before the food arrived. She came anyway, said nothing, and left behind a single golden apple inscribed with 3 words, "To the fairest." 3 goddesses reached for it at once, and each of them assumed the compliment had been meant for her. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite demanded Zeus decide, and Zeus, who ruled everything, decided this was somebody else's problem. He sent them to a herdsman on Mount Ida, a young man raising cattle who was secretly a prince. Paris had been left on that mountain as a newborn because his mother dreamed she gave birth to fire. The dream meant the boy would burn Troy down, so the king ordered him exposed, and shepherds disobeyed. Now 3 goddesses stood in front of him, and each quietly offered a bribe instead of trusting his judgment. Hera offered rule over all of Asia. Athena offered victory in every battle he would ever choose to fight. Aphrodite offered the most beautiful woman alive, and never mentioned that the woman was already married to a king. Paris handed the apple to Aphrodite, and in that moment, 2 goddesses became permanent enemies of his own city. The woman was Helen of Sparta, wife of King Menelaus, and her marriage had already caused one enormous problem. Every king in Greece had courted her, so her father made them all swear to defend whoever won her. That oath was meant to prevent a war between suitors. Instead, it assembled the army that would sail east. Paris arrived in Sparta as a guest, ate at Menelaus' table, and waited for his host to leave home. When Menelaus sailed to a funeral in Crete, Paris left with Helen, the treasury, and every rule of hospitality. Whether she was carried off or walked aboard willingly is a question the ancient poets never quite settled. Menelaus came home to an empty palace, then went straight to his brother Agamemnon, who commanded far more ships. Agamemnon invoked the oath, and the kings of Greece discovered that an old promise had quietly become a summons. Odysseus feigned madness until they laid his infant son before the plow. He swerved and was conscripted anyway. Achilles was hidden too, dressed among the daughters of a distant king, because his mother had foreseen his death. Odysseus laid out jewelry and weapons, then simply watched to see which of the girls reached for the sword. 1,000 ships gathered at Achilles, and then the wind stopped and stayed stopped for week after empty week. A prophet said Artemis wanted the commander's own daughter, so Iphigenia was lured to Achilles by a fake wedding. Her father killed her, the wind returned, and the fleet sailed with a curse riding inside its own flagship. His snakebite wound stank so badly, the crew marooned Philoctetes on an island, with the bow of Heracles. A prophecy said the first Greek ashore would die first. Protelaus jumped anyway and was dead within minutes. Troy did not fall in a season. The Greeks camped on that beach for 9 years, raiding the coast. Agamemnon had taken a priest's daughter as his prize and refused the ransom the old man carried. The priest prayed, and Apollo sent plague into the Greek camp for 9 days, killing the animals first. Forced to give her back, Agamemnon seized Achilles' prize instead, and the best fighter alive stopped fighting. Achilles asked his mother to beg Zeus for Greek defeat, until the army understood exactly what he was worth. It worked. Hector drove the Greeks back across their own defensive trench and set fire to the first ship. Agamemnon sent gifts and apologies. Achilles refused everyone, still weighing the insult heavier than the burning fleet. His closest companion Patroclus begged to borrow the armor, believing the sight alone would push the Trojans back. It did for a while. Then Apollo struck him from behind, and Hector finished him beneath the walls. Hector stripped that armor and wore it himself, which meant Achilles would soon be fighting his own reflection. Achilles' grief was so loud his mother heard it underwater, and brought him new armor forged by a god. He went back knowing the prophecy attached to it: kill Hector, and your own death follows almost immediately. Hector waited outside the gates, then ran at the sight of him, 3 full circuits around his own city. Achilles killed him, lashed the body to a chariot, and dragged it past his parents every single morning. Then old King Priam crossed the enemy camp alone at night and kissed the hands that killed his son. Achilles wept with him, gave the body back, and the Iliad ends there with Troy still standing. Everything famous about the horse comes from other poems, and the war still had one more terrible year. Penthesilea brought Amazon cavalry to defend Troy, and Achilles killed her, then grieved over the body of his enemy. Then Paris drew a bow, Apollo guided the arrow, and it found the one place Achilles could be wounded. The Greeks argued over his armor. Odysseus won, Ajax lost, went mad with shame, and fell on his sword. Prophecy said Troy could not fall without the bow they had abandoned, so they sailed back for Philoctetes. He forgave them enough to shoot Paris, whose death solved nothing, because Helen simply married another Trojan prince. Odysseus and Diomedes then stole the Palladium, the sacred statue that supposedly kept the city from falling. A carpenter named Epius built the horse. The fleet burned its camp and hid behind a nearby island. One man stayed in chains to explain that the horse was an offering and that the Greeks had gone. A priest speared its flank in warning, and 2 enormous serpents came out of the sea for him. Cassandra screamed the truth from the temple steps, cursed by Apollo to be right and never once believed. They tore down part of their own unbreakable wall to drag it inside, then celebrated until they slept. At midnight, a torch burned on the beach, the fleet came back, and the men inside opened the gates. Priam died at his own altar, the city burned, and Aeneas carried his father out through the smoke. Menelaus raised his sword, then took Helen home to Sparta. 10 years of war, ending exactly where it started.